Hey everybody, this is Thigh Company here. Welcome everyone to today's daily live stream. Hope you all been doing well. Today is March the 3rd, 2024. Hope you all been doing well today. And today we're going to be talking about the story about how I grew up poor, what was like pretty much growing up poor and family was poor and all that, and kind of the backstory as to how all that happened, and also how we got out of as a family out of being poor into the middle class and pretty much what's going on from there on, pretty much. So, give you all kind of a backstory. I was born in Salisbury, North Carolina, but then shortly after I was born, all moved down from Charlotte. And so the story kind of involves a little bit of the Salisbury time, but a lot about pretty much up to early 2010s, I would say, give or take. So, my mom, my mom's side of the family is from Russia. My dad's side of the family is American. So you could say I'm Russian American or mix, or whatever you want to say it, half American, half Russian, however you want to go about classifying that. So, which kind of gives an interesting viewpoint on everything, because you have one half it's the Eastern views, European views, Russian views, the other half is the American, and because of that, there's tends to be I know what one side thinks, I know what another side thinks, and I know how all that works, kind of socially, culturally, and all that. So my mom was from St. Petersburg, Russia, which is like, I think in Russia, there's, as far as I can tell, you can kind of about it now, but used to be that there was only like two significant cities, which was, Moscow and St. Petersburg. And then you have, second tier cities and third tier, and, kind of like what China has nowadays. Um, but what's, uh, I guess you can kind of give two different stories leading up to how I ended up growing up poor. Um, so I'll give my dad's story first, and then I'll give my mom's story. My dad's American. He was born in New York, but pretty much grew up and lived in North Carolina his whole life. Um, my dad's mom, basically my grandmother, she was pretty much always poor. She was born in Salisbury herself, in like 1923, I think. So she'll be like over 100 years old now. And um, which is kind of crazy to think about, that she was like alive till 2016. So she was alive for a long time. Um, would have been nice if she made it to 100, but things happen, and that did not happen. And let me get some water right quick. I want to get some water here, and I'll kind of continue talking about the whole story as well. So my dad's dad, though, he was decent. Like, he was a hardworking man. He was born in New York, grew up in New York, lived in New York most of his life. Came down to North Carolina for a little bit himself, when they moved down from New York to North Carolina. And pretty much, uh, the way I see it is like my dad's dad was the successful person in the family. My dad's mom arguably grew up poor, and there's arguments that she took advantage of my dad's dad. Like, it's hard to exactly say the story, and I wasn't really alive to see how my grandfather and my dad's dad lived, and because of that, it's hard to give a really good perspective on in that area. So, to continue the story, um, my I think basically, I like to make the idea is like as soon as my dad's generation, so that would be my dad. Since my dad was born in 1949, um, was my dad. He has two brothers and a sister. So I have my dad, two uncles, and an aunt on my dad's side. Okay. Uh, my dad was like the odd one in the bunch, like the weird one, because I have one uncle who became, well, I guess again to give backstory. Um, I don't know what kind of work my dad's mom did because I'm when I tried calling him, the only thing I seem to consistently get told is that, "Oh, I don't remember. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about," and he doesn't want to talk. But the other side of the family says that she was, what do you call, a housewife, basically, meaning that she stayed home, taking care of the kids. But she also had a nanny as well, and a bunch of other stuff. So it's like, what really went on, nobody seems to know. And there's suspicion that likely the nanny was the only person doing work and she was just sitting at home doing nothing. But again, who knows? Because this is like way before I was even born. Um, but yeah, my dad's dad did a bunch of different work. I think one of his earliest jobs was like he did sales in New York in selling candy, soda, or pop. Um, I think he worked at what they call candy bars or candy shops or something or other, where people are mixing Coke, like Coca Cola, other sodas, and selling that syrups and what do you call it, no, gas water or soda water, selling that in candy and milkshakes and sundaes, kind of like what you would see at an ice cream parlor, I guess. Um, and then later, my grandfather went into the military. He was a military officer. He did really good work during World War II, and that's kind of for another story, though. But he did well in the military, and I'll definitely make another live stream talking about what my dad's dad did in his life, because he's a pretty very interesting man. Um, After military, he became a police officer in New York City. He also was a lawyer, an attorney in New York City, but I don't know. It's like the later half of his life. I don't know much because it's like he kind of. I know he played golf a lot. Um, the guy liked ice cream. He loved ice cream, vanilla ice cream, kind of like your classic ice creams. Um, but I don't know much else other than I know his wife or my grandmother. She liked to take his money and she liked to spend his money, and a lot of weird stuff happened back then that it's kind of hard to explain. But essentially, my dad's generation, I have one uncle who followed my grandfather and became a lawyer and attorney in South Carolina. Another one, the other uncle, went into chemistry, so like chemistry, like chemical engineering, but his specialty was like plastics, inks, glues, adhesive, kind of like what you would call um, industrial chemical engineering is, I think, what you would safely kind of explain it as. And then the aunt or his sister went into telecommunications with, I believe, what are the big telecommunications? I want to say AT&T or Verizon. I don't even remember anymore, because she doesn't really talk to a lot of people in the family, and she's got her own weird stuff that goes on too. But my dad was sort of the weirdo out of the group, and he went to he had a weird bunch of weird things to happen. The first weird thing was that he hooked up with and I'm talking about his like first wife, hooked up with a girl, and that girl had a kid at a young age. I think it was like 16 or 17 or something, or maybe the girl was 16 and he was 17, or some kind of weird, very young marriage slash pregnancy happened. Typically, my guess is the girl got pregnant and then they married shortly after. But my understanding was that he was not with that first wife for a long time, and they divorced, and a bunch of weird things happened after that. Um, and again, I don't know all the details because he doesn't remember, and I think my dad has freaking dementia or something going on. I don't know at this point. Um, so if I ever get him back to here in Charlotte or in North Carolina, I might try to sit down and do an interview with him if possible. Um, the other thing is that so he went to school. My dad went to school, and he was in school for a very long time. I think he was like after he graduated high school. I believe he was in school for at least another 10 years, probably even longer. Um, and he went into psychology, and it was like what I call general psychology slash like when you go and think about psychology, you typically you think about either psychologists or psychiatrists. Psychiatry is like medical psychology. Regular general psychology, which is more of what he did, was with family counseling and people who are like, oh, let's go to therapy, let's go to counseling, and he was kind of more into that area. Meaning like somebody had stress or something in psychology. Oh, I need to talk to somebody, and he'll be the guy. Like, all right, you pay me, and you can come and tell me and what's bothering you, and I'll counsel you. Kind of like type of psychology. That was his thing, but he never even did that. He went into like family studies. He got a PhD in like some kind of psychology, in something involving family studies. Um, Genealogy was a very big thing that he was doing all the time, meaning that, oh, I want to go and study the family. Who was the great great grandfather of so and so? Oh, do we have some ancestors or relatives that are famous people? And that was like his thing. And he even was continuing to do that through into like when he met my mother and married my mother. And that was his thing. Like he basically, as far as I know, I don't know if he did any sort of official work prior to doing the psychology stuff because I've heard of rumors that he worked at a candle factory. I've heard rumors that he was like a guy who was like what they call it, cleaner, um, like a person who would be sweeping, like a store sweeper. You'd be given a broom and you just sweep the store, and that's it. Um, so basically, a nobody. Other than he may have possibly worked at a candle factory for a short period of time, but he never did anything productive with that. And I would bet he was probably a nobody there. Um, he also became an avid golf lover and golf fanatic, um, but that never helped him with anything. And he ended up getting this like crazy fantasy developed within himself that, oh, he was going to become this great professional golf player. He thought he was going to be joining the PGA Tour and he was going to be better than Tiger Woods. That was like his big thing, and Tiger Woods was like the big popular golfer at the time. And he was like, "Oh, I'm going to beat Tiger Woods someday, and I'm going to be this big professional golf player." And that never was a thing, even though he spent hundreds of, I'm pretty sure he spent thousands of dollars even on golf clubs, golf memorabilia, golf apparel, everything involved in the sport. Like he'll go to golfing range, waste money there, um, and that was his thing. I mean, yeah, you could say it's its hobby, but it was like obsessive. Um, and when he went into the psychology stuff, again, he never really had money. This was kind of like when credit cards were really big at the time. He would go into like credit card debt, which was a very popular thing that he liked to do for some reason. And I don't know why on earth he liked that. But that was during a time where you could like accrue debt on a credit card and then move it from one credit card to another and another and keep doing this, like what was called credit card hopping, which was popular during the 90s. And it's, certainly not a thing nowadays. There's certainly other restrictions and things that will cover that or block that from happening. Um, but once he got his PhD in that psychology, what he ended up doing was he became a teacher at a different colleges in Salisbury. I think he worked at mainly two, um, but he worked at one main college called Livingston College, which is a kind of a famous college for certain reasons. I don't even know if I'm going to see if I can even look it up right now. Now that I think about it, Livingston College in Salisbury is considered to be a. All right, I'm reading off of Google here too. Livingston College is a private, historically black Christian college in Salisbury, North Carolina, affiliated with the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. Uh, and it is also accredited by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools to award bachelor's degrees. Um, so basically, it's based off of Google. It's a black college. My dad taught there for several years, and he was he was kind of a sketchy professor from what I've heard. Apparently, what happened was he would only teach one or two classes in like the morning, and he would like wake up early in the morning, and he was there until maybe 10 or 11 a.m. So he'd be working maybe 4 or 5 hours, one or two classes, and which, from what I understand, he was barely teaching the classes, and he was basically having the kids write essays all the time, and he would grade based off not the content but the length itself of the essay. Meaning that, oh, if you wrote a page, you get an A. You wrote a half a page, all right, maybe A minus or B. If you wrote a paragraph, you get a C. Oh, you wrote a sentence, all right, I'll maybe give you D. He didn't write anything F. That was kind of his thing, and he wouldn't read any essays, and would just grade based on the length. And he worked there like literally just long enough, doing the bare minimum, just so he could get the North Carolina like teachers state pension fund, meaning that when he retires, he gets a pension from the state because he was a professor or employee of the state. And I just think it was so crazy. That was like his thing. He was gonna like get the bare minimum so he could get that pension. And I'm like, what are you gonna do with that? Because the pension, even now, that pension is hardly any money. It's like maybe, I believe it's like $300 a month, and you cannot live off of $300 a month in North Carolina or where he lives now in Georgia. $300 will probably be enough to pay off a utility bill, if that. So that was his thing, and he never did anything productive, and so he didn't really bring in much money at all. And whatever money he brought in, he would go spend it on golf. He would go spend it on restaurants, since he didn't know how to cook. He would barely learn how to cook and make something every once a month or once a week. Um, and he just didn't like to cook at home or make food at home. He would always go to eat out. He would always go to fast food. He would go to restaurants or fine dining establishments, tipping big money to the waitresses and servers for some reason. So that was his thing. And then later he did eventually, once he moved into Charlotte, he finally got a job working for, I think it was the city or the county. I think it was the city. Um, he worked for CMS, or Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools, for a short amount of time, doing what I call statistical work, which means that they were working on projects, trying to do exams to basically, as he put it, teach teachers how to teach. And the purpose of this was like So CMS could create exams to get better scores. So once they get better scores, they have evidence so that they can get more money from the Department of Education, or basically get more money from the federal government, so that the what do you call it? CMS basically makes more money, or gets more money from the federal government, because this is, public schools, and you need money from the government. Okay. Now there are sometimes people who do donate to schools, but it's a very rare thing to happen. So basically, that was his thing, and then he eventually dropped everything, moved to Florida. Once he got into Florida, I think he got into like more debt. He tried to buy a house, got a mortgage, and then from there, everything went downhill very quickly. He wasn't making money. He lost that house that he got in Florida, and then moved to Georgia. Was a nobody in Georgia, and now basically that's what it is now. It's just a nobody. Um, so basically, he was poor his whole life. Um, but as far as my mother, it's a different story. She was she was not poor. She wasn't, if I could call her middle class in Russia, because I think for middle class, it's sort of, it depends on how you define that, really. But in her situation, she grew up in St. Petersburg back during the Soviet Union, which was at that time called Leningrad. And, they had basically my mom's dad, or my, grandfather, he was poor. He lived in sort of the outskirts of the city, in a house that his dad, my great grandfather, built from funds that he received from his time uh, serving in the military during World War II. And he pretty much lived in that house and was working kind of as a factory worker, but I don't think it was big money. But my mom's mom did have some money. She came from a lineage that was lived in a city, so they had more money, because the city's, of course, more expensive than living in outskirts in a village, right? Um, and through the Soviet Union, they got basically a free apartment, which was a 3-bedroom apartment, and they pretty much lived in this apartment. And then I think they were moving apartments once in a while, but I think from the 70s onward, they stayed in the same apartment. And basically, it was my grandfather working as a factory worker, and my grandmother worked as a nurse, a daycare supervisor, and kind of like as a, yeah, like I think that was like her two main jobs, as a nurse and a daycare supervisor. But she had also good connections with um, some people in the healthcare industry in Soviet Union. So people who are kind of higher up in society, and she had very good relationships, while my grandfather wasn't really a nobody. So because they basically had, work, place to live, they, had food to eat. I know people did starve in the Soviet Union, but they were in a good city and they always had food to eat, so they were fine. Um, but I believe what happened was my mom ended up getting a student visa, or an educational visa, to come here to the US and study. And I believe that's how she ended up getting into the US and meeting my dad during the early 90s, right before the Soviet Union fell. And uh, so it wasn't no like, sketchy stuff. It was like a legitimate um, process where she came in and, met my dad and ended up getting US citizenship through that. I believe it's through marriage or some legal method, essentially. And but my mom didn't know that my dad had a bunch of debt. So whenever my mom brought over money, or my mom's mom or my grandmother brought over money, it was to cover essentially that credit card debt that my dad created. And so and during the Salisbury time period, um, My mom and my dad lived in apartments in Salisbury. My dad was teaching at the college, and my mom was working as pretty much was a student, but then she was also working in a restaurant. And then eventually, when my grandmother came over, she also was working in the same restaurant as my mother. My mother was a server, and then I think my grandmother was a dishwasher. Maybe she did some prep work as well, maybe a prep cook. Um, but it wasn't anything like good money. It was sort of like minimum wage, plus they would get free food. So enough to basically cover their living needs. Now, when they came to Charlotte, it was sort of a different story. My dad was continuing to be nobody in Charlotte, right? Until he got um, the what do you call it, the school job, and he was making, I think, once he got the school job, I believe he was making 36,000 salary a year, and my dad was like, "Oh, I'm gonna make this money, and then I'm gonna stay home, take care of the kids, and that's it." And so he never had this like plan of improving himself or growth. It was like, let me do the bare minimum so I can live comfortably. Was kind of like his mindset, because he didn't want to, like, he never had any crazy like he, of course, he, like anybody, he wanted to make money and grow, but he never wanted to like do work, essentially. My mom and my grandmother, and basically my mom's side of the family, uh, they did want to, do work. They weren't lazy like my dad, and they were actually had a bunch of stuff planned out. But unfortunately, they couldn't do anything because one, my dad had all his credit card debt, and because they were new to the U.S., they weren't really familiar with how everything worked in the U.S. All the bureaucracy, the nuances. What's the cultural differences between Russia/Soviet Union versus what it is here in the U.S. and in the South and in Salisbury and in Charlotte, and everything that you got to get acclimated and adjusted to, right? So eventually, I think they moved. They found a house in Charlotte because my mom kept bugging my dad that, hey, you need to move to Charlotte because Charlotte's a big city and you can get a better job and do more there. Plus, Charlotte has an airport, so you don't have to drive an hour and a half to the airport if there's a need to do traveling, like go back to Russia for whatever reason. Okay, and so they eventually bought a house in North Charlotte. I want to say it was like maybe 140. I can probably. I wonder if I can find. Let me see if I can find the information here, because I know they sold the house in like 2007, right before the, what do you call it, the recession, right? The 2008 recession. Um, I want to see if I can try to find some information, because I know what, I'm curious what they sold the house for. And there's always some information out there, but like if you like anything before 2005 tends to get kind of sketchy on the internet. Um, because I know they sold the house in 2007. Okay, so the house was built in 88, so I actually bought it. They did not buy it brand new. I know that for sure. Trying to see if I can find information on the history. Okay, so here it goes. So it was sold in 1999. So that means that we bought it in 1999, which puts me at like 4 years old. My sister wasn't even born yet, and this would, so yeah, they, okay, cool. So they the prices online are a little bit different than what they actually sold for. But apparently, they, according to the online records, they bought it for 150, then sold it for 196.5, so 196, you could say, um, which is cool. and I can tell that the next person who lived there didn't live there long. They sold the house for 220, and then they left, which I bet is probably because of the recession and everything. And what's crazy is though they sold the house for 219 in 2009, and then it sold again in 2013 for 143, meaning that they lost 35% of the property value, which is pretty crazy because apparently they had termites in the house and there was a bunch of crazy stuff. Like I know we had a snake infestation at one point, um, a lot of craziness. And eventually, I think it was like a realty group or real estate company bought out the house and now they're just renting out the house. And they are renting out the house for an expensive price. They're trying to get $2,300 a month out of this house. It's a 3 bedroom, 2.5 bath. It's 2,300 square feet. All right. But yeah, so basically 2007 comes along and my dad gets this crazy idea of, oh, let's all pack everything up, forget everything in Charlotte, and let's move to Florida. And he wanted to move to Tampa, Florida. And the reason behind he wanted to move to Tampa, Florida was because he had a son with the first wife, and that first wife, well, I think the first wife moved to Florida somewhere, but the son was apparently kind of successful. He ended up becoming an insurance lawyer, and on top of being an insurance lawyer, he had a few projects that were going on as well. He did something in real estate. He did something in like credit cards or credit history or credit score or what they call it, credit reporting, which is like people who do get loans and do like credit or not what's it called, not credit card stuff, but like if you're familiar with the U.S., you get credit scores on stuff whenever you take out a loan, so people can tell how trustworthy you are, right? And of course, my dad would probably had terrible credit history, especially later on when he lost a house in Florida. I'm pretty sure it became abysmal. Um, but yeah, essentially that was his thing. Why on earth he did that, I have no idea. And I'm trying to find it. I got to do some fixing with the lights here, but I'll continue the story here regardless. But yeah, that was just unfortunately that he decided to do. And despite our efforts of telling him, you gotta not get into credit card debt, you gotta pay off your credit card debt. He didn't listen to any of that. He was more obsessed with playing golf and living comfortably than caring about his financial future and all of that, which is very unfortunate. That's what he decided to do, but that is what he ended up doing. Um, Now, growing up poor, what ended up happening was like, my mom basically was the person bringing in money or the majority of the money because she ended up working in different restaurants all across Charlotte as a server. And she worked in some pretty high end establishments, kind of in a few popular areas. She worked in an area called South Park in Charlotte for many years, but I think she worked in many restaurants even outside of South Park, but South Park was a big area for her. Um, and this is like before she ended up going into her degree and all that, which I'll get into in a moment as well. But we were poor. Like one of our things would be like, would never go to Walmart. Walmart was considered way too expensive. And for us back in the day, our grocery store of choice would be like Food Lion. And Food Lion would be like pretty much the main place where we could get any sort of groceries for cheap. And then eventually would do things like, I know at one point, and when we lived in North Charlotte, um, there was a food line where we would even go like behind the dumpsters because there were the workers would leave like shopping carts with like bananas and rotisserie chicken and cakes and desserts, and we would that would be our basically our food would be getting these bags and bags of bananas, and everything was all sanitary and nothing was like spoiled. This would be stuff that they would put out back that evening of the day, and we would drive around and pick everything up. And pretty much that's how we lived back then. Um, and our other pretty much resource was whatever friends we or family friends we could meet up, um, that we knew in Charlotte, because my grandmother was going to at that point English classes. She was trying to learn English. My mom was pretty much already fluent in English, but my grandparents were trying to learn English. They wanted to get U.S. citizenship as well, and eventually they did get full citizenship, like my mother, and it was good from there. And thankfully they ended up getting out of that poor lifestyle. And I mean, this is how pretty much what how they ended up getting out of being poor. Okay, so eventually my dad decided to leave my mom and move to Florida because he thought he was going to get a better life, a better quality of life by essentially feeding off of my half brother or his first son. And um, that was his thing. Like he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna go get clients and I'm gonna make money selling like insurance or selling real estate." And he thought that was how he was going to live in Florida comfortably and basically being or living off of that of his first son. And eventually, that ended up failing, and he basically became a nobody. But here's how. And once he left, the family started actually getting out of being poor. He, I don't know what if he got any money from us when we sold that house in North Charlotte and moved to Southeast Charlotte, but um, what ended up happening was my mom eventually, once he left, all the credit card debt left. Basically, my mom was not responsible of taking care of any of that debt, and so we basically whatever money we made, it was like from selling that house and moving to Southeast Charlotte. And so whatever that was, or actually I should say whatever money we had left from making money selling that house, it went into the new house, purchase of the new house, whatever mortgage was with that, and repairs and renovations of the house. And my mom did, I think, she did like 2, 3 different types of work jobs back then. She was a server for a short period of time. She also worked at a place called Quiznos, which is sort of like Subway or a sandwich shop. Um, my grandmother also helped her work at Quiznos, but yeah, that was basically their job. And my grandfather was at that point moved from Russia to here into the U.S., taking care of me and my sister. And my mom, uh, she had a degree when they lived in Salisbury. She ended up getting a degree in international business, but she never got any work with that. So what she ended up doing was she went back to school again for nursing. And once she got her or her CNA, she ended up starting to work with um, a dermatologist, and that's how she ended up getting a lot of experience and working those 3 jobs until she got her nursing license or her um, bachelor's in science and nursing or BSN degree. Um, that's how she ended up getting like out of the first part of getting out of being poor. Once she eventually got her nursing degree, she ended up working at the main hospital in Charlotte for about, oh God, many years, like 8 or 9 years. And that's like the first way she got out of being poor into getting into middle class. And eventually of being working in the hospital, and she got a job as a school nurse. And she ended up finding out that becoming a school nurse was paying her more than working at the hospital. Even though she worked in like the hardest or toughest department, she worked in the ICU or intensive care unit. And once she got into the nursing or the school job, the school nurse job, that's when she got that solid foundation of being at least middle class. And then eventually she found a new husband. That husband was an engineer. And basically, both of them were bringing in money. And they pretty much, that's how they got into middle class. Okay. My grandparents got citizenship. And my grandmother stopped working, but she ended up going into being like what's called disability benefits, low income benefits, getting SSI, food stamps or EBT, and basically everything like that. And then most recently, we ended up finding many ways to get free groceries through the local food pantries or food banks. Um, then we had started meeting up with friends. With like one friend would be like, well, or I should say friends in within the Russian speaking community. And eventually would find one person who has one specialty, another person has another specialty, and we created a network because for whatever reason, and this is like a saying that my mom likes to say, it's as if the Americans, they work to live and live to work. And this is from, kind of a general observation from not just herself, but from my grandmother, for other different Russian speakers. And they're like, why is it that no one's like, trying to make a life out of themselves, really? So, once we started, that's like the new thing is like now we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we get out of middle class and to getting into either upper middle class or even getting into, the rich class or high class, right? Or, what do you call it? The first class, I guess, right? Um, you know, what would that even be? Upper 10% or what? I don't know what you would call that, but basically the next step from here would be owning a business, being essentially an entrepreneur, and having a business that is successful, right? Bringing in basically enough income where you don't have to work a regular job. Okay. Meaning that from in Charlotte perspective, that would probably be you would probably have to make at least 3,000 a month minimum. Um, and that's like on the poor end. Realistically, you should be trying to get 4,000 and up. I was going to say 4 to 6,000 would be considered good. If you make over 6,000 a month off of a business, then you're doing great. Here in Charlotte, at least. She's just about paid off her mortgage, so I don't know how much she has left. But her next plan is we need to get an apartment. Wants to that apartment that was basically given to my grandparents through the Soviet Union. Technically, is I think it's become privatized, so technically they own that apartment, and if they want, they could sell that apartment. But as far as I know, I think they're planning on keeping that apartment, and it looks like they want to buy a second apartment in the downtown St. Petersburg, Russia on one particular area where my grandmother grew up during her childhood. Remember, I said my grandmother was from the city, right? So city center basically is kind of where she's from. Um, so we don't know how soon that can be accomplished. But once that gets accomplished, the next I guess goal would be to one pay off the house here in Charlotte, which that will be taken care of any soon, within the next, I imagine within the next few years, 5 to 10 years at most. Um, but then I need to get a place myself. I don't know how long that's going to take, but we're already kind of working on. We have one technically where there's a business with eBay, but eBay's not bringing enough money to consider that to be a stable income. But of course, we're working on that, trying to get that to grow. There's a set, and it's come to my attention now that if you want to get to basically being an entrepreneur, not only do you have to own one business, it's like you got to own several now. You have to own 3 to 5 at least, or maybe even more. Okay, so the goal is like, how do we get to the three number? Let's have one business bring in that much money, have another business bringing in another money, and then the third business bringing such and such amount of money, right? So that's like probably the next hustle. So yeah, that's pretty much how we grew up poor and how we got out of getting poor. So that's pretty much the story. So if you like this story, make sure to subscribe, hit hit the bell icon so you get notifications for future live streams, videos, and episodes, and all that. And also, give the video a thumbs up, like the video, and also comment down below what would you like to see for future live streams and videos. Maybe you have a recommendation. Maybe you have a question about a certain topic, or maybe you would like for us to cover a certain topic. But anyway, guys, this has been Thigh Company. Happy March 3rd, 2024. Hope your rest of your March goes well, and we'll see you all in the next live stream. Thank you all so much for seeing this episode, and stay tuned for next one. Take care, guys. Have fun. Hope everything goes well. See you soon.